The day Vivienne Walsh got fired, she wore her best blazer. She'd ironed it the night before, standing in the narrow kitchen of the apartment she shared with her younger brother, Owen, pressing the collar twice because she wanted it to look right. She had a presentation that morning. Quarterly projections for the Harmon Group's Chicago satellite office. She'd spent 11 days on that deck, color-coded tabs and everything, and she wanted to look like someone who belonged in the room. She didn't get to give the presentation. Richard Harmon called her into his office at 8:47 in the morning, before she'd even finished her coffee. He was already standing when she walked in, which was never a good sign. Richard Harmon sat for everything. Meetings, phone calls, arguments. He stood for one thing only. "We're restructuring," he said. She noticed he didn't look at her when he said it. There were other people in the room, his personal attorney, a man named Gerald, who Vivienne had always found mildly reptilian, and Cassandra Harmon, Richard's daughter-in-law, who had been brought onto the executive team 6 months ago despite having no discernible qualifications other than marrying into the family. Cassandra was sitting in the chair that used to belong to Vivienne's direct supervisor before he was quietly pushed out last spring. "Restructuring," Vivienne repeated. Richard finally looked at her. He had the expression of a man who had practiced this conversation and found it distasteful. "HR will walk you through the severance package. It's generous." Cassandra was studying her nails. Vivienne stood there for a moment, just a moment, doing the math in her head. 4 years, 60-hour weeks. Giving up a better offer from a firm in Denver because Richard had personally asked her to stay, told her she was essential, that he was grooming her for a VP role that apparently no longer existed. 4 years, and she was being told this by a man who couldn't maintain eye contact, in front of a woman who had stolen her parking spot the week she arrived, and never once apologized for it. She said, "Okay." Not because she was okay, she said it because there was nothing else to say, because her voice was doing something tight and dangerous at the back of her throat, and she had decided years ago she was never going to cry in a professional setting. Not ever. She walked back to her desk, packed her things into a cardboard box that Gerald had apparently had ready and waiting, and she left the building. The elevator ride down was 32 floors. She counted them. What Vivienne didn't tell anyone, not her brother, not her best friend Dana, not the therapist she'd been seeing twice a month since their mother got sick, was that the job hadn't just been a job. The health insurance through Harmon Group was the only thing covering Owen's treatment. Owen was 24 and had been managing a heart condition since he was 17, and the medications alone ran close to $3,000 a month without coverage. She'd done the math on that too, standing in the elevator, watching the numbers descend. She had maybe 90 days before her COBRA ran out, and she'd have to figure something else out. 90 days to find a new job in an industry where Richard Harmon knew everyone and had already, she would later learn, made several calls. She didn't know that yet, standing on the sidewalk outside the Harmon Group building with her cardboard box and her ironed blazer. She just knew it was raining, softly, and she hadn't brought an umbrella because she'd been so focused on the presentation she'd never checked the forecast. She walked 3 blocks before she admitted she had nowhere to go. There was a hotel bar around the corner from the office. She'd walked past it 100 times and never gone in. It was the kind of place that looked expensive from the outside, all dark glass and a doorman who nodded at people like he was granting permission to exist. But it was raining and she was holding a cardboard box, and she had run out of both options and dignity at approximately the same moment. So she pushed through the door. The lobby was quiet. Mid-morning, too early for the lunch crowd, she found a seat at the bar, set the box on the stool beside her, and asked for a club soda because she still had to drive home. The bartender was a young woman who looked at her with the specific kind of sympathy that meant she'd seen someone come in from a bad morning before. "Roof night?" the bartender asked. "Roof morning," Vivienne said. "The worst ones never are." She sat there for a while. The rain picked up outside. She called Dana, but Dana was in a meeting. She thought about calling Owen, but Owen would worry, and Owen's cardiologist had just told them stress was something to manage carefully, and this was not something she was going to put on him, before she'd figured out a plan. She didn't have a plan. She had a club soda, a cardboard box, and 90 days. She wasn't paying attention to the man who sat down 2 seats away from her. She was staring at her phone, reading through her emails and deleting anything with the Harmon Group domain because she didn't want to see it anymore, when someone said, "They're wrong about you, you know." She looked up. He was older than her, by maybe 15 years, somewhere in his mid-40s, though the kind of mid-40s that looked like it had been maintained carefully. Dark suit, no tie. A watch she didn't recognize but suspected was worth more than her car. He was reading something on a tablet propped against a glass of water, not looking at her. "Excuse me," she said. "The people who let you go." He finally looked up, dark eyes calm in a way that felt less like relaxation and more like control. "They're wrong about you, I can tell." She should have found this unsettling. She found it, against all reasonable judgment, slightly interesting. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know you've been sitting here for 40 minutes, and you ordered a club soda." He gestured at the box on the stool between them. "I know you came from an office. I know you pressed that blazer this morning, which means you cared about something. And I know whatever happened was unexpected because there's still a presentation clicker in the top of that box." She looked down. There was, in fact, a presentation clicker in the top of the box. She'd forgotten it was there. "That's either very observant or very unsettling," she said. "Probably both." He returned to his tablet. "Sorry for the intrusion. You looked like someone who needed to hear it." She should have let it go. She was not, historically, someone who let things go. "They eliminated my position," she said, "after 4 years." With a box Gerald from legal had apparently pre-packed, he looked at her again. Something shifted slightly in his expression, though she couldn't have named what it was. "Gerald," he said. "Reptilian man, kind of a small head." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. "And the position? Financial analysis. Harmon Group. They're restructuring, apparently." "They're not restructuring," he said. She stared at him. "Harmon Group announced a strategic pivot to commercial real estate 2 weeks ago," he said. "That's not a restructuring, that's a rebranding. They're keeping their entire finance team. They're eliminating the people who might ask inconvenient questions." The room felt, briefly, like it had tilted. "How do you know that?" she said. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a card on the bar between them. She didn't pick it up right away. She looked at it. It said, "Ronan Caruso, Sterling Meridian Capital." She'd heard of Sterling Meridian Capital. Everyone in finance had heard of Sterling Meridian Capital. They were the kind of firm that got mentioned in the same sentence as words like private and selective, and occasionally untouchable. "Ronan Caruso," she said, not picking up the card. "Yes, the Ronan Caruso. I'm not aware of another one." She looked at him for a long moment. He had the patience of someone who was very rarely contradicted, and the demeanor of someone who had long since stopped being interested in people who weren't worth his time. He was still talking to her. "I'm Vivian Walsh," she said. "I know." Something about the way he said it made the back of her neck feel strange. "You know," she said flatly, "I've reviewed your public work. The Harmon Group published your Q3 analysis last year. There was a methodology footnote most people would have skipped. I didn't skip it." He took a drink of his water. "You have a very precise mind, Miss Walsh. Harmon Group didn't deserve it." She picked up the card. She told herself she wasn't going to call. She drove home, changed out of the blazer, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table while Owen was at his part-time job at the hardware store. And she told herself she was not going to call a man she'd met in a hotel bar who had appeared out of nowhere and told her she had a precise mind. That was not how serious professional decisions were made. She did not call. She emailed. She sent a brief, professional message to the address on the card. "Dear Mr. Caruso, thank you for the conversation this morning. I would be interested in learning more about potential opportunities at Sterling Meridian if you believe my background might be relevant." And she did not expect to hear back for several days, because that was how these things worked. He replied in 11 minutes. "Miss Walsh, can you come in Thursday? 10 o'clock. RC. No salutation, no pleasantry, no extra words." She found this perversely reassuring. She had spent 4 years surrounded by people who used words to obscure meaning. This man seemed to use them only when they were necessary. She went Wednesday. Sterling Meridian Capital occupied the top 4 floors of a building in the West Loop that Vivienne had walked past dozens of times without ever really looking at. The lobby had no visible branding, which she'd read somewhere was a deliberate choice. Sterling Meridian didn't advertise, didn't seek coverage, didn't need either. Their clients found them through channels that weren't discussed openly. She was shown to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that made her feel simultaneously very small and very awake. Ronan Caruso came in alone, no assistant trailing behind him, and he had a folder in one hand and a coffee in the other, and he sat down across from her like they were resuming a conversation rather than beginning one. "Tell me about the footnote," he said. She blinked. "The Q3 footnote? The one that explained why you'd excluded the Lake County projections from the regional aggregate. Most analysts include them because it inflates the numbers." She felt something familiar unlock in her chest, the feeling she got when a problem was worth solving. "Because Lake County was mid-acquisition," she said. "Including transitional assets in a baseline projection is misleading. It gives you a prettier picture than the one you're actually standing in. Harmon gave you trouble for that. It wasn't a question. He asked me to revise it twice, she said. I revised the wording both times. The methodology stayed the same. For the first time, something that was clearly, unmistakably a smile crossed Ronan Caruso's face. It rearranged his whole expression, made him look briefly like a different person. One who was, she noticed with some alarm, extremely difficult not to look at. I'm offering you a position, he said. Senior analyst. You'd report directly to me. The salary is, he named a number that made her hold very still. That's, she said, and stopped. The benefits package includes full family health coverage, he said without changing his tone. From day one. No waiting, period. She looked at him. He looked at her. She thought about Owen and the medication bills and the 90 days she'd been counting down since the elevator. She thought about all the things she'd been quietly terrified of saying out loud because saying them made them more real. You're not supposed to know about my brother, she said. No, he agreed, but I do my research when I'm considering someone that should bother me more than it does. Probably, he said. She looked out the window at the city. It was grey again, a flat Chicago grey that she'd lived with her whole life and had somehow never quite gotten used to. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. What is it that you actually do, Mr. Caruso? He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was deciding something. I manage capital, he said, in ways that require discretion, precision, and an analyst who won't revise her methodology to make the numbers prettier. And the other things, she said carefully, that people say a lot of things. They say you're connected, she said, to things outside the conventional financial world. He met her eyes, and what she saw there was not denial. I protect what's mine, he said quietly. I've built something that does not get touched. The people who work for me do not get touched. If that's something you can live with, Miss Walsh, then we have something to discuss. She sat with that for a long moment. She thought about Cassandra Harmon studying her nails, about Gerald with his pre-packed box, about Richard Harmon who hadn't been able to look at her. The methodology doesn't change, she said, ever, for anyone. I know, he said, that's why you're here. She took the job. She told Owen she'd found something new, something better, and when she gave him the details on the insurance coverage, his face did something complicated that she didn't look at too long because she would have cried and she had a rule about that. Vivienne, he said. Don't, she said. I was just going to say thank you. I know. Don't. He hugged her instead, which she allowed for approximately 4 seconds before she stepped back and said she had to prep for her first week. Sterling Meridian was different from anything she'd worked in before. The office was quiet in a way that felt intentional, staffed by people who kept their heads down and their skills razor-sharp and didn't ask questions above their level. She understood, over her first 2 weeks, that discretion here wasn't a preference, it was architecture. Every system, every communication channel, every meeting was structured around the assumption that information had weight and should be carried carefully. She found, to her surprise, that she liked it. She was good at carrying things carefully. She saw Ronan Caruso every day, which was both normal and not. Normal because she reported to him and they had standing meetings, and he was relentlessly, almost aggressively precise about financial structure. Not normal because she became aware, slowly and against her better judgment, of the way he existed in a room, like he had calculated every possible outcome of every possible event and decided which one he preferred. Like nothing surprised him. Like he was the only person she had ever met who occupied space without apologizing for it. He was not warm. He was direct, careful, occasionally dry in a way she suspected most people missed. He remembered every number she'd ever mentioned to him without writing anything down. He asked about Owen once, early on, in a way that was so matter-of-fact she almost missed that it was a question. How's your brother managing the transition? And when she said Owen was doing better, that the new coverage had meant he could actually fill all his prescriptions, Ronan nodded once and returned to the spreadsheet, and that was all. She thought about that nod more than she should have. The first time she understood what she'd walked into, really understood it, was 6 weeks after she started, when a man came to the office whom she'd never seen before, and Ronan came out to meet him in the corridor rather than the conference room, which had never happened before. She didn't hear what they said. She wasn't meant to, but she noticed the way 2 of the senior staff shifted, almost imperceptibly, to positions just slightly between her desk and the corridor, like a wall that had formed without anyone being asked. She mentioned it to Ronan later at the end of a meeting. The men this morning, she said. Should I know what that was? He looked at her for a moment. No, but I should know it happens. You already do, he said. That's enough. She thought about the conversation in the hotel bar. I protect what's mine. The people who work for me do not get touched. She wasn't scared. She found this, upon reflection, slightly concerning, that she wasn't scared. But she understood, in the way she understood numbers and patterns in the invisible architecture beneath a set of financial statements, that what Ronan Caruso had built was not chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was control so precise it looked, from the outside, like nothing was happening at all. She realized, good at working inside that kind of structure. She did not plan to tell him about the call from Richard Harmon. Richard called her on a Tuesday in her 8th week, which was unexpected enough that she almost didn't answer. When she did, he was friendly in the way people are friendly when they need something. "Vivienne," he said, "I've heard you landed somewhere new." "That's great. Really great. Thank you, Richard. I wanted to reach out personally. No hard feelings, I hope." She said nothing. "I'm actually calling because we're looking at a potential collaboration," he said. "Sterling Meridian has come up in some preliminary conversations and I wanted to—" "Richard," she said. "Yes? I'm going to stop you there," she said. "Whatever you're reaching out about, I'm not the right contact. I'd encourage you to go through official channels, which I'm happy to provide if you need them." She paused. "Also, I know about the calls you made after I left." Silence. "I'm not going to do anything with that information," she said, "but I wanted you to know I know. Have a good afternoon." She hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment, very still, and then she went and knocked on Ronan's open door. "Richard Harmon just called me," she said. He looked up from his desk. She told him everything, the call, what Richard had said, what she'd said back. She left nothing out. When she finished, Ronan was quiet for a moment. "You should have let me know the moment he mentioned collaboration," he said. "I know." "I'm telling you now." She thought about it honestly. "Because I wanted to handle it myself first," she said. "I needed to say the thing I said to him before I told anyone else. I needed to do that for me." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you handled it. You're telling me now. That's the right sequence." He returned to his papers. "If he calls again, I want to know immediately." "Understood." She turned back. "The calls he made," Ronan said, not looking up. "I know about them too, and they didn't work." She stood in the doorway. "Why?" she said. He looked up then. "Because I knew your work before I knew your name, Miss Walsh. Anyone who told me otherwise wasn't someone I needed to listen to." There was a company event in December, something Ronan did once a year for the team, understated, a dinner at a restaurant that had no sign outside and where the staff clearly knew who they were serving. Vivian wore a dark green dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion and only slightly panicked about, and she brought Owen as her +1 because he'd asked and she'd found, in the past few months, that she had less and less ability to say no to Owen when he was doing well. He was doing well. He was taking all his medications. His last cardiology appointment had been the best one in 2 years. He was talking about going back to school in the fall, finishing the degree he'd put on hold when things got bad. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like a person with a future instead of just a present. At dinner he sat next to one of the junior analysts, a quiet young woman named Portia, who laughed at something Owen said and then looked surprised at herself for laughing. Vivian watched this from across the table and felt something so large and warm in her chest she had to look away. Ronan was seated beside her, as he had been for most of the dinner, and she was aware of him in the specific way she had become aware of him, like a constant low frequency she'd stopped trying to tune out. "He looks good," Ronan said quietly. "He does," she said. She didn't ask how he knew which person at the table was Owen. By now she'd stopped being surprised by what Ronan knew, he said. "The insurance policy did that," she said, "which you provided." "Which you earned," he said. She looked at him then. The restaurant was candlelit, warm, full of voices from the rest of the table. Her colleagues, people she'd come to understand and quietly trust over the past months. And Ronan Caruso was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not the controlled assessment she was used to. Something older than that. Something that had been there for a while, she thought, waiting to be acknowledged. "Mr. Caruso," she said. "Ronan," he said. She looked at him for a moment. She said he didn't say anything else, he didn't have to. She felt, in that single word, the shift of something enormous and quiet, like a door that had been unlatched from the other side. The weeks after that were different in small ways. Up did something large. He brought her coffee the way she took it. 2 sugars, no milk, without asking. She started leaving his door open when she was working late, a kind of unspoken permission to talk if he needed a second pair of eyes. They worked side by side through a complicated acquisition analysis for 3 straight days, and when they finally closed the files at 10:30 on a Thursday night, he said without looking up, "You should eat something. The Thai place on Harrison delivers until midnight." "I know the Thai place on Harrison," she said. "I know you do. You order from them every Tuesday." "That's mildly alarming," she said. "It's pattern recognition," he said, "which you should appreciate." She laughed. It surprised them both. He ordered the Thai food. They ate at his desk. He told her, over noodles and the city lights beyond the window, about how he'd built Sterling Meridian, starting with almost nothing. 2 clients who trusted him because there was no one else who would tell them the truth about their exposure, and a fundamental conviction that the only thing worth protecting was the thing you were willing to be the last line of defense for. "What were you protecting?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "My family," he said. "When I was young, there was no one else, so I became someone else." She understood that. She understood it the way you understand something that lives in the same part of you as your oldest memory. "I became someone else too," she said. He looked at her. "After my mom got sick," she said. "I was 22. Owen was 16. I became," she thought about how to say it, "I became the plan. I became the person who figured things out. I forgot, for a while, that I was also just a person." "You're still just a person," he said. "You know that." "I'm working on it," Acrosses said. Something unguarded, brief, real, in the way that only unplanned things are real. He reached across the desk and covered her hand with his, just for a moment, just the weight of it, and then he withdrew. "Vivienne," he said. "Not Miss Walsh. The first time." "I know," she said. She wasn't entirely sure what she knew, but she knew enough. He asked her to dinner in January. Not a team dinner. Just dinner. She said yes before he finished the sentence, which she later decided she was not embarrassed about. He took her somewhere she hadn't been, a small Italian place in Lincoln Park, run by people who called him by name, and they sat across from each other not as employer and employee, but as 2 people who had spent months in close proximity and had run out of reasons to pretend they weren't paying attention to each other. He told her things she hadn't known about the people who worked for him. The man who ran his security, who had been a refugee at 19 and had nothing, and had built himself into someone formidable. The analyst who had left a brutal marriage and come to Sterling Meridian because someone had told her this was a place where people didn't get erased. He didn't tell her these things to impress her. He told them the way someone tells things when they want to be understood. She told him about her mother, about the months in the hospital, and the way Owen had tried to hide how scared he was, and the night after the funeral when she'd sat in the kitchen until 4 in the morning, making lists of things to do because she couldn't figure out what to do with her hands otherwise. "Lists," he said. "Spreadsheets, technically," she said, "but emotionally, lists." He reached across the table. This time he didn't withdraw. She turned her hand over, so her palm was against his. It felt, she thought, like the first time in a long time that she'd been held without having to be the one holding. In February, Owen met them for brunch. His idea, not hers, which she found both mortifying and touching, and he spent the entire meal interrogating Ronan with the cheerful ferocity of a younger sibling who has decided the best way to protect his sister is aggressive friendliness. Ronan answered every question with the same measured calm he brought to everything, which she'd expected, but she had not expected him to ask Owen in return about the school program he was applying to. They talked for 40 minutes about supply chain logistics, which Owen was studying, and which apparently Ronan had opinions about. She sat between them and did not cry, which she considered an enormous personal achievement. When Owen went to get the car, Ronan looked at her and said, "I know," she said. "Not just medically," Ronan said. "He's going to be fine. He's one of those people." She looked at him. "How do you know who those people are?" she said. "You are too," he said simply. "I know them because you're one." She didn't have anything to say to that, so she took his hand, and they stood on the sidewalk in the February cold until Owen pulled up, honking once, and she felt full. Genuinely full in a way she hadn't been in so long she'd almost forgotten the sensation. In March, sitting at the window in the apartment she'd moved into after her lease had ended. Smaller than she'd wanted, better light than she'd expected. She was on the phone with Dana, trying to explain what had happened to her life in the past 7 months, and Dana kept saying okay, but how in an increasingly delighted voice. "I don't know how," Vivian said. "I walked into a hotel bar in the rain with a cardboard box, and someone told me I had a precise mind. That's the most you thing I've ever heard," Dana said. "I had nowhere to go." "You always have somewhere to go," Dana said. "You just finally let somewhere find you." She sat with that for a while after they hung up. She thought about the blazer, folded now in the back of her closet. She thought about Gerald's pre-packed box, which she had eventually recycled. She thought about the elevator and the 32 floors and the way she'd counted them because she needed something to count. She thought about a hotel bar and rain and a card placed on the counter that she hadn't picked up right away. She thought about Owen's face at the brunch, animated, alive, talking about things he cared about to someone who was actually listening. She thought about Ronan's hand on hers, warm and certain and completely without apology. She had gone to work that morning, the same as any morning, and she had knocked on the open door and said good morning. And he had said good morning back and slid a coffee across the desk. 2 sugars, no milk, and she had sat down across from him and opened her laptop and started in on the numbers, and it had felt so much like exactly the right place to be that she'd had to stop for just one moment, just one, to pay attention to it. She'd spent so long being the plan, being the person who figured things out. She'd been so busy being the one who held things together that she had never thought to ask what it might feel like to have something hold her. It felt, she thought now, like a beginning she hadn't seen coming. The best kind always were.